Welcome to the Politics and Media programme. The BBC has received hundreds of complaints about its new comedy series, Citizen Khan. The sitcom centres on a self-appointed community leader, Mr Khan, and his family in Sparkhill, Birmingham. Some viewers say that it stereotypes Muslims and mocks Islam. Many of the complaints have been about the character of Alia, Mr Khan's daughter, who wears a hijab but is obsessed with Western fashion and magazines. One controversial scene has her putting on her headscarf and pretending to read the Quran because her father has just walked into the room. Other Muslim viewers have said her character reflects the realities of their communities. Here's a clip from the programme.
Hello, my name is Mr Khan, community leader. Today I want to tell you about the laws of cricket.
Racial stereotypes? Or just a sign that the Muslim community is able to laugh at itself?
Look at this!
The BBC received over 700 complaints about Citizen Khan, which follows the household dramas of a Pakistani Muslim family in Birmingham. The media watchdog Ofcom also received around 20 complaints about the sitcom, which some claim reinforces negative stereotypes of Muslims and Pakistanis.
Boys are bad.
But the BBC says Citizen Khan is not meant to represent the Muslim community as a whole, and the series creator, Adil Ray, himself a British Muslim, argues that the comedy is an opportunity for people to see that Muslims are just like everyone else, with the same human flaws. Despite the controversy, the sitcom has just been given a second series by the BBC. Love him or hate him, Citizen Khan isn't leaving our screens just yet.
Well, in the studio to discuss Citizen Khan are Hasnet Lias, a freelance writer and columnist for the Muslim Post, who reviewed the programme in The Independent. We're also joined by Asghar Bukhari, spokesman for the Muslim Public Affairs Committee UK, and on the phone we're joined by Anjam Anwar, chair of Women's Voices. Welcome to the programme, all of you. So Hasnet, worth a second series?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, ever since I published my article for The Independent, the response from many of the British Muslims has been pretty much a mixed bag. I mean, I thought I'd focus primarily on Alia because I thought that, you know, her mores reflect the realities of many British Muslims. So I definitely think it's worth a second series, yes.
I think we need a second series. Every single day the Muslim is stereotyped and the wider community is frightened of us. And for the first time they're seeing Muslims as normal human beings, people that they can laugh with and empathise with. And I can't believe that the Muslim community is so upset over such a trivial thing. It's something that is to their benefit at the end of the day.
And laughing with or laughing at?
Well, I mean, I saw the programme and I thought my TV was rather expensive, so I didn't want to throw my sandal at it and break it, so I just switched it off. I mean, I agree that we have to have sense of humour and freedom of speech, etc., etc., but, you know, I do worry about how we present certain communities for the sake of humour. I mean, would we bring back Asghar? Would we bring back Love Thy Neighbour in the language that has been used and images? So, whilst I agree that we need sense of humour, I'm not too sure whether Mr. Hassanat in the studios, when he talked about Alia and the portrayal of women, I'm not too sure what kind of Muslim women you've been associating with, but I meet a lot of women who do not relate to Alia at all.
Well, let's explore this a little bit more then. I mean, let's first of all take Asghar's point. It's a comedy series. Yeah. This isn't like the extradition cases that happened last week. It's not serious politics in the same sense, but there might be a relationship between these two things. We live in a highly charged political atmosphere about Muslims. Whether or not in itself, at another time, in another place, this might have been just good or bad humour, and we can discuss that. Yeah. In this environment, it's not good news.
Okay, look, if we were to take the comical and the theatrical element of the characters, put it on one side, and just look at the characters, they definitely...
Some say the writers have done that.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I mean, the characters definitely speak volumes for the realities of many British Muslims. I mean, I'm Bangladeshi, majority of my friends are of South Asian descent, and we speak freely and fearlessly about all the bigoted Muslim Khans in our community, the muted voice of many of our women folk. I'm not really sure where Amjad, the semi-retarded fiancé, fits in, thankfully. But, you know, are we to say that characters like Alia are just a figment of Adil Ray's imagination? Of course not. Speak to many South Asian Muslim males and females, they'll tell you, you know, we've grown up with them in our family circles, we've witnessed their sort of teasing and flirtatious overtures in college and university campuses and all the rest of it. So the moment I saw her depicted the way she was, it was just instinctive for me as a journalist to put pen to paper and write about it. What's distressing is the levels of negative feedback. I mean, I've been told that, you know, being sort of pandering to a liberal temperament as opposed to an Islamic one by laying bare her reality. I mean, I think that's ridiculous, being a sort of a devout Puritan Muslim myself. I mean, why is it that whenever a Muslim decides to talk about the lived realities of his or her co-religionists, it arouses suspicion? It should never be like that, okay? So I definitely think her portrayal was very accurate. And, you know, Muslim parents, they discuss the likes of Ilya with increasing regularity, with concern and tension. Imams, sheikhs and mullahs, a lot of the times they erupt from the pulpit having to address, you know, issues like Ilya in our community. And Muslims of a young demographic, on the whole, know this to be true. So there are many Muslims like this, and I don't think we should be, you know, dismissing that reality.
How do you think this fits into the wider spectrum? Because, you know, maybe that would be a stronger point if this were a programme only watched by Muslims discussing the internal issues of the Muslim community, but that's not how it's playing. 2.3 million people who are watching the stereotypes generated by the news at 10 are watching this.
Exactly. Every single day what you have is this constant manufacturing of fear of a community that most of Britain does not understand, know or trust. And for the first time, or one of the very few times, they're getting to laugh with that community and understand the community.
Do you think they are laughing with, or do you think they're laughing at?
Even if they're laughing at, they're laughing at and empathising with a community that they can understand, that they're not scared of, that they're not frightened of, that they can see them as human beings. It's a comedy, obviously. They're going to laugh at the characters in the comedy as you would in any comedy, right? But for the first time, those characters are Muslims and overtly Muslim, and they look Muslim. And so they're going into the lives of these Muslims and they're saying, well, hang about, I'm not scared of these people. I find them quite funny. I can understand them. And here we have the typical Muslim reaction, my kind of strange, nutty reaction that something so trivial, so unimportant, they fly off the handle and get really, really upset about. 700 complaints. I bet you they didn't get 700 complaints for Baba Ahmed being extradited and how the BBC portrayed him as like a footnote to Abu Hamza. Yeah. You know, they don't, on the major issues, they do nothing. They're pacified, incompetent, always unwilling to act on any of the important issues that face the Muslim community. But when it comes to, you know, a comedy, they're up in arms as if, you know, they're defenders of the faith. It's, you know, a warped sense of understanding of Islam, a warped sense of understanding of the community, and worse, the failure to understand what they need within Britain. They need this show more than this show needs them.
Andrew, let me bring you back in because, you know, I don't think anybody would argue that there isn't a place for humour in these circumstances, but it's quite a fine line, isn't it? I mean, if you take a film, for instance, like about Bend It Like Beckham, for instance, a decade ago, which wasn't about the Muslim community, was about an immigrant community. I think most people would say that was an extremely funny, well-made film, but that the drive of it politically was effective and progressive. Do you think they'll say the same about this?
Well, I want to pick up this, but I also want to pick up what Asghar's been saying. And Asghar, I'm so sorry to use this language, but you talk such a lot of rubbish sometimes. It really upsets me. Muslims are not upset because Muslims were being portrayed in that way, but you have to look at the context. Would we bring Afghanistan back today? Would we bank Love Thy Neighbor back and say that it was politically correct? To this day, I have never met anyone, and I mean this, who would have said that it portrayed the Asian or the Muslim community. It doesn't portray the Muslim or Asian community, maybe batches, but to paint the whole Muslim or Asian community by Citizen Khan, it's absolutely unthinkable. It doesn't work. That does not mean to say that we do not stand up, or that people like us, you know, with headscarves, etc., don't have sense of humor. I have sense of humor. I used to love watching Yes Minister. I had no problems with that. I have problems with a bunch of people who are not Muslim themselves. These actors are not Muslims. I think there might have been one who are portraying a Muslim family. And they're not portraying the whole Muslim, generally, but a specific part of the Islamic or Pakistani culture, or who perhaps come from a particular area in Pakistan.
But Anjum, how could you ever portray the full Muslim community? You're always going to focus on a family.
But it's such a negative attitude. Asghar, this is negativity.
Well,
if it's
let's
a
follow this through
money-making
because
I mean, if this is a money-making racket, then yes, I understand. But you would never dream of bringing Afghan back, or would you never dream bringing black and white minister show? Why?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point, isn't it? You see, because I mean, well, the first example that Anjum uses shows you what a tricky question humour is, because Afghan, of course, was meant to be a parody of a racist, not a racist himself, although he was taken up by racists as a figurehead. So it can, you know, the intention of the writer and the reception that the audience gives it can be two different things to start off with. But the other point that she makes surely is a valid point. No one would want to see the return of Love Thy Neighbour and argue that Love Thy Neighbour was a, you know, bringing Muslims into the main, or blacks in this case, into the mainstream. This was a portrayal which assisted the wider sort of recognition of what the community was about. There's a series of racist stereotypes. Or if you want to go further back, the Jim Crow laws, which were the racist laws that applied after the American Civil War, Jim Crow was actually a stand-up act. It was a vaudeville act. And first of all, it was played by whites in blackface, and then it was played by blacks. Now, I suppose you could argue that's a sort of progress, but not many people would argue that today.
No, I know. Okay, fair enough. There are elements of that which is true, but I do think Muslims we can do with a bit of self-deprecating banter and humour. I mean, Saira Khan, she argued this, I think, a few days after the first episode of Citizen Khan was aired on BBC. She said, you know, there is something mutually beneficial to, you know, taking the fun or mickey out of yourself, because in many cases it is true. And after I published what I did, I mean, I just focused on one character. I wasn't suggesting for one moment, Anjum, that this is an accurate portrayal of every British Muslim. But, you know, since it's been published, so many British Muslims have effectively hijacked what I've said. They've given it unwelcome new associations and meanings. I've been turned down by many Muslim lifestyle magazines, monthlies and journals, because they felt that the tone, overall tone coming in my article, it implied a very unspoken, disparaging judgment of, one, the Islamic faith, and two, Muslim women in general. I mean, I was affronted by that conclusion, being a Puritan practicing Muslim myself. I think we definitely ought to develop a bit more thick skin on some of these issues.
That's good.
On the political side, and then moving on to the fact that it's that I think personally that female, the fact that it's a woman involved in this, and the Muslim community seem hypersensitive about that. Exactly. Politically, I think people like Afghani were in their time breaking a stereotype. He was obviously a bigot. And that came across within that show, from what I can remember. And you had a black character there. Yes, he wasn't the shining black Malcolm X, but the fact of the matter was, he was still obviously an open-minded character that was that was trying to portray or break out of this English psyche at that time, that kind of, or certain segments of the British society, a psyche that blacks were inferior and kind of, you know, uneducated, etc. And so what the Muslim is currently is in a rut. They want Malcolm X, but they are not willing to work at all to get there. And when they don't get Malcolm X, then they complain.
But do you think that this programme is in the broad category which, you know, many people recognise that Afghan was an attack on racism and an attack on bigotry, or do you think it's in the broad category of those, and there have been many, programmes that basically reinforce the stereotype?
The main stereotype about Muslims, that the most dangerous stereotype for the Muslims, is that we are violent and threatening to the culture that we live in and to the world. And this is nothing to do with that. If it has a stereotype, it's that this old crony, for example, is you know, self-interested and you know what, you know, basically duplicitous. And the fact of the matter is, every mosque has them, as far as I am concerned. Most of the mosques in this country are run by people like Citizen Khan. So, you know, we're kidding ourselves to say that it's dragging us back. It's making the white non-Muslim community see us as human beings, not to be frightened of. The real issue, I think, the reason why 700 calls went in there was nothing to do with Citizen Khan, who, you know, probably they relate to. It's because of the female character there is a bit too liberal for their liking, and the Muslim men in Britain, or a segment of them, couldn't handle that. Bottom line.
Anjum, let's just ask another question here. I mean, you've made reference to, you know, a number of the sort of 70s sitcoms. I mean, isn't a different problem with Citizen Khan that it's kind of retrograde, not in the necessarily, or, you know, we can argue about whether it's retrograde in the political sense, but it's a throwback in its format, isn't it?
Yes, I suppose to a certain extent it is, but maybe there's something else is happening now. The players who are acting, the actors, they're not Muslim, are they? Hasn't it?
No, they're not.
They're not. Now, if you go back to someone like Woody Allen, Woody Allen is Jewish and he makes fun of himself and about his own faith. Maybe it's easier to swallow that when people are doing it to themselves rather than someone else doing to them. So I don't know whether that plays into this all. But I don't understand why we make assumptions that Alia, is your typical Asian Muslim girl. Because I don't see that as a typical Asian Muslim. I think that a misguided young lady in many respects. And to think that she will suddenly put her headscarf on very quickly because she's doing the Quran, because her parents or one of her parents is coming.
But Anjum, come on, you can't be serious. Are you honestly saying that every Muslim woman out is some sort of pious angel?
No,
That's
I am
not
not
the,
saying.
you're not living in the real world.
No,
They might.
not at all. Asghar, you're doing exactly. You're paintbrushing the whole of the mosque culture with that they're all obsessed and.
They are.
Citizen Khan. That is not. I have over 40 mosques in this area. I agree that we have problems. I agree that we have situation, but that is not the truth. That is not the truth. And let me tell you something else. Where does this stop? Why do we get then offended by a film like The Innocents that comes out? Because it's attacking something which is very dear to us. When you allow a comedy of a certain kind, and we become immune to certain kind of humor, that's what it leads to.
Okay.
I'm being very preventative, I think.
Okay. Well, let's go back into that frame for a moment, because there are any number of programs that have been programs and films which base their humour on religious communities. Rev, the current does with Christians. The Life of Brian, famously, the Monty Python film did. But let me bring you back to this question. Isn't it a question of how charged the atmosphere is into which this humour is released? There's no charge around being Christian in this country. That it's not an issue. I mean, sometimes people say that it is, but it isn't really. Famously, the Church of England has been described as the Tory party at prayer. It's part of the integrated establishment of this society. So there's no charge about this. And of course, people who are sensitive to their religious conviction will have problems with that. But my point is that we're talking about something larger than that here. A decade of the war on terror and the associated attacks on civil liberties, and you've mentioned some of the most serious and most recent of them. This is not a neutral atmosphere in which you release this programme, and so irrespective of whether internally to the Muslim community this may be a good or a bad thing, examining the issues, there's a wider context here.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. But okay, on the point of satire itself, not every Muslim you speak to is going to make a big song and dance about the satirical aspect of Citizen Khan. We have different degrees of sensitivity and perception. It's very easy to say, I feel affronted and there's an Islamophobic bent to the programme, which is wide off the mark. What's difficult to do is to actually get to the bottom of and unpack the psychology of many of these characters, right? I don't think any of the stereotypes that were coming through, even if there were stereotypes, were unhelpful in the slightest. I mean, look, talking about satire, I think the good thing about satire in general is that it definitely gets a person to interrogate the invisible assumptions of his or her life and culture. Now, in relation to Citizen Khan, I think many Muslim, and I'm directing this at Anjum here, we can't keep living in a fool's paradise, all right? I mean, there are many Muslim girls who do exude this gamey tendency, as I mentioned in from an article in the Independent, and we need to talk about them. And I don't see any harm, sort of talking about them, mentioning who they are, why they dress the way they do. I mean, a student of mine, I'm a private tutor in my spare time. She's a Muslim female student who's hijab clad. She said that many hijabi girls in her campus and wherever she goes, they blur the boundaries between a perfectly accessorized wardrobe and resembling limited edition dolls fit for a low rent pool party. And that reminded me exactly of Aliyah. It's definitely a prevalent theme, in Muslim society that we need to lay bare, we need to shine the light on, right? And I think satire can do that.
Yeah, but I keep trying to bring you back to this point because I think it's an important one about the context in which this takes place. When Anjum's mentioned Woody Allen films. Now, Woody Allen films do quite often satirise various aspects of Jewish community and culture, and we all understand that. We all understand what he's doing and why he's doing it. If he'd released the same film in Germany in 1933, exactly the same content, it would have been a problem because there's a different context, no?
Not in this particular comedy.
Case.
And the reason is this. The things that are dangerous, the ideological attack against the Muslims and Islam, are focused around violence, barbarism, a kind of violence and backwardness towards women. All of these things that they attack Islam with are not associated with this comedy. This comedy doesn't say that the son isn't a terrorist. You know, the father doesn't go around beating up on the mother. Then I would say, I wouldn't be sitting here defending it. I would be saying that you have demonized and used this comedy to demonize our community. So all the areas, for example, if it was about blacks a few years ago and all the black characters were thieves, you know, and couldn't be bothered to work. Well, then that's a racist stereotype. In this context, none of those areas that they have previously demonized us with, and still are currently demonizing the Muslim community with, are being used by this, by these comedians. So it's unfair to say that the charge within society, which is correct, is being exacerbated by this comedy. In fact, if anything, it's being diffused.
Yeah. So, Andrew, what about that point, that as long as we're talking about something else and not the kind of main ideological offensive against Muslims, then we're in a good place, not a bad place?
I think we'll come back to the question that you originally asked, the context, and whether if Woody Allen was to do that in Germany, what would happen? And I think with the times that we're living in at the moment, it's difficult times. It's been a difficult time for Muslim community for some time. But the fact is this the right method? I have no problems in discussing the difficult issues and discussing that girls dressing with a headscarf, with you know, makeup plastered and not behaving in the way they should be. I haven't got a problem with that. But all I'm saying is that, is this the best way of doing it? It's not what we say, but it's how we say it. And I do not believe that this is the best way forward.
What do you think about the part of the confusion that may arise from this is the fact that it is such a familiar format. You know, every sitcom since, you know, and I'm sad to say this is going back a while, since I was a child, you know, they're endlessly, and I'm glad to say endlessly forgettable, whatever, on the buses, the rag trade, on and on and on, in this format, and the sort of canned laughter. Does the form in which they're writing make it more difficult to appreciate what they might be trying to do?
Absolutely. What is the intention? I mean, I have not understood the intention. If it's is it to open up a conversation? Is it for the Muslim community to look within themselves that that's me? Well, it isn't me. I don't relate to it. Maybe, you know, there are a lot of people who don't relate to it, but I don't relate to that.
Okay, Asghar, go on, Asghar.
Maybe you may not, but you know, a lot of Muslim families do. A lot of Muslim families, you know, as I speak, they will be discussing about why are there so many girls in our community, hijab-clad girls, and at the same time they sort of have this caricatured, you know, sort of sexuality, you know, with them as well. I think one of the things is that it would have been great if you had somebody like Aliyah and somebody of an Orthodox Islamic hue, woman as well, and they could have, you know, locked hijabs as opposed to horns. You know, I think this is becoming a slightly representational discourse, but you know, I don't mind doing their bidding if you don't mind doing that either.
You know, for me, maybe I don't want to stray off topic, but to me, the bottom line is that Muslims are too, for some strange reason, sensitive about women and the way they're dressing. I mean, get off your high horses. It's not the end of the world. You know, why is it that Muslim men are so, you know, concerned about the way Muslim women dress? They never, I don't want to go on a rant, but they don't, where are they when, but where are they when the Muslim women are getting beaten up on? Where are they when the Muslim women are being bombed and jailed and you know, getting thrown out of their house? They're never there. But as soon as a woman dresses the way they don't like it, then they call up and they make, you know, it's the end of the world. You know, Islam's being destroyed. Get a grip. You know, women are human beings, right? Help them, get them, you know, help. They're not even allowed in our mosques. No Muslim man has ever raised it. And yet all of a sudden, you know, she doesn't wear the hijab that day and, you know, it's as if Islam itself is going to fall tomorrow. You know, to me, it's bigotry. And the only reason why these calls went in, apart from Anjum, I think Anjum is a forward-thinking and has some... Yeah, of her views, I don't agree with them, but I think they're valid, right? But the majority of the calls that went through, probably in my opinion are for Muslim men who couldn't handle the fact that there was a female on there that was doing something that they didn't want, you know, their wife, their daughter, their mother, whatever, you know, doing, and so it was too much to handle.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there because that's all we've got time for. I'm sure that we've increased the viewership for the second series of Citizen Can, at least among people who watch this channel. But do join us for the second half of the programme in a moment.